When I got more involved, it inspired me. It lit a fire that I was super excited to be involved in these projects, and it turned the burnout upside down.
I've already done a video about an APP director, but today I'm going to talk to Dr. Brooke Schweitzer. She's a PA, and she has held some even higher administrative roles. She has been an interim CEO of a small hospital, and she also has been a medical director. She's going to tell us today a little bit about how she got those roles and the pros and cons of working in administration. Thanks, Brooke, for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Let's dive in to talk about what roles you've had clinically. So currently you're an APP director, correct? But that's a new role for you, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I've practiced in a whole host of capacities: emergency medicine, family medicine, hospitalist work, geriatrics or nursing home coverage. And then for about the last 9 years, I was doing plastic and reconstructive surgery on cancer patients.
And what was your first foray into the administrative side?
That came really early in my career. As I was practicing in emergency medicine and family medicine, I was at a small critical access hospital in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, and two of the administrators both left for promotions at a larger hospital. So myself and a colleague were promoted to fill in an interim capacity. I was wildly unqualified for these roles, but it was a wonderful opportunity that fell in my lap. So I learned very quickly what is required, and day by day kind of understood some of the processes involved in governance, compliance, finance. And so that was really my first dive headfirst into administration.
Now, what was the title that you were moved into when all that happened?
It was just interim CEO, CFO of a
Okay.
tiny 16-bed critical access hospital.
And then you just did that on top of your clinical duties?
Yep, it was quite the wild ride. I had a lot of help from my colleagues in decision making and a lot of support from the nursing staff as well. It was kind of a group effort. But yeah, our hospital was without any executives for about a year. It was more just somebody needs to do it. So here you
Right.
are. I'm proud that we kept the hospital afloat and it's still running.
So what was your next step into administration?
And my next job was solely in a clinical capacity, just practicing in plastic and reconstructive surgery. And slowly over time, I kind of crept back into that administrative world. The first thing that I did once I kind of switched fields into plastic surgery was I went back to school. I knew that I liked hospital administration, and that really piqued my interest. And so I went back and I got my doctorate in healthcare administration. And it was pretty eye-opening, as many of my classmates were not clinical and didn't even know the role of what a PA did or was for. And so that kind of made me even more intense into wanting to go into hospital administration to represent our profession.
Then what was your next administrative role? I assume you're still working clinically for a while, but then you moved into
Still working clinically. My next position was supervisor, and that was overlooking about 15 PAs and nurse practitioners. And that role grew quite substantially as our department grew, up into about 33 PAs and nurse practitioners. And that taught me a lot about leadership and kind of all the ins and outs of PA and NP focused compliance.
Now, to get a role like as a supervisor like that, did you feel like you needed your doctorate at that point?
Definitely could have had it without my doctorate. I had several colleagues that were also supervisors across that health system that were also in supervisory capacities without a doctorate. I do think getting your doctorate sends a signal. It tells your administration and your colleagues that you're serious, you're interested, you're ambitious, and you're looking for something more. And I think it was definitely contributory to me getting that position. However, it's not needed. And I think over time that may shift. I do see a lot of job postings for kind of middle level management roles that say doctorate preferred.
When you have these roles as a supervisor, are these paid roles, or are these just positions that they're asking people to step into and feel like being on committees and just doing in your spare time?
The supervisor was a paid promotion. I still was 100% clinical, so I still was expected to maintain the same productivity that I was doing before my supervisor role. And this was in addition to that. So I would find ways to fit it in, before surgeries or while we were waiting for cases to kind of work on some of my administrative responsibilities.
I look at it and I think, oh, that's another 40-hour job on top of my 40 plus hour job. Is it that much of a time commitment?
Yeah, honestly, it's really what you put into it. you could do the bare minimum and just, do the schedule and approve your colleagues' time off. But that's not the path that I wanted to take. And I was fortunate to have a colleague who was also a supervisor, and we shared the role. And her and I together were able to achieve a lot. We turned our training program into more of a formal transition to practice program that had specific didactic and surgical components. We also created our own morbidity and mortality conference, just talking about issues where PAs could improve and learn from others, in addition to an education series. So there was kind of just a whole host of things.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I like that when you talk about learning from each other and helping to really define what it is that the PA does in those roles.
I think it's important to create a culture where all of the PAs and NPs can rely on each other and feel comfortable. They have that buzzword, psychological safety, where you can easily ask your colleague, what's going on? I need some help with this. Or here's an interesting, tactic in surgery. Do you think that I should try this? Or do you think that I should propose it?
So you took the supervisor role and you really made it something great. And you, again, learning experiences, right? These are all stepping stones along the way. And so then what was your next administrative role?
My next administrative role was associate medical director. Although it's not as linear as it seems, there was lots of time in between there where I was still in my supervisor role and really looking for something more. I kind of just dove into our administration and I learned who all the executives were and what their functions were and how that related to me, and could a PA fit in that role. And I applied for several positions during that time. And I think that it was serendipity that some of them didn't work out. I applied for the medical director position. It came available, and I was really thankful because the message that I had been saying to a lot of my colleagues and to a lot of our leaders and even some of the executives is that I think that there is a valuable role for PAs and nurse practitioners beyond just our clinical roles, and that we should be considered for some of them. And so I was really excited to see that they were considering PAs for the medical director role. It was a little awkward as this is going against the grain and not the usual form, as medical directors are typically physicians. But I was proud to interview for the position and ultimately selected for the job. I was selected for associate medical director, and unfortunately that was a non-paid position. And while that was frustrating to me, I thought that it was worth it to go for it, to get that experience, to understand the dynamic. And I think that that is a risk that you have to take. Taking on more work and not getting paid for it is unfortunately the name of the game in a lot of these leadership positions. And you have to do that to prove yourself to ultimately get to a position where you will be given time and compensation. And so although I was frustrated about that, I think that it was worth it. And then I was ultimately promoted to full medical director, which was a paid position. Now, this was only a part-time position, so I was still supervisor, was still practicing 100% clinically. And so this was in addition to all of that. So there was quite a bit of extra work of kind of the three layers of this particular job. But ultimately, it was 100% worth it. And I'm incredibly proud to be among the first PAs promoted to medical director at that system. Not all positions are like that, but in the beginning, as we are kind of trailblazing this path of PAs into administration, you will have to accept some of those realities until you eventually find the position that matches your interests.
Yeah. So what was that like? I assume there were some challenges and pushbacks. Were there other people that were not happy with it, or was it pretty much just physicians felt it should be a physician role?
Yeah, I think that that was the sentiment. And it can feel a little bit uncomfortable because this is something that's new and change isn't always easy. But just because I'm not an MD does not mean that I can't be a leader. And I think that that was something that had to be realized by administration and some of our physicians, that I can still provide a lot of value from my role as a PA. So yes, it was a little bit uncomfortable of being the first one to be in that position, but it just took time, just like any new role would for any profession. And I was proud of the work that I was able to do in working with my physician colleagues to advance many of our projects for our patients.
If you've never been in administration, you hear these terms, and I'm learning. I've got a video about what an APP director, is and what they do. But how is that different from a medical director?
Sometimes I think that this is kind of nebulous in between the different roles, but for a medical director, it's more operational. So we were overseeing 4 different subspecialized surgery lines, and our job was operational in the fact that we would find ways and processes to make the patient intake all the way until their discharge more efficient. We were also in charge of safety, so every safety report that was filed, we would investigate it and see how we could improve and learn from that. We also were in charge of quality metrics, making sure that there wasn't any hospital-acquired infections or any issues that would occur while the patient was on the floor. In addition, we were tasked with multiple system-wide projects as it related to our area, such as a more efficient discharge, training of our staff on new specialized equipment, and other responsibilities as it related to our subspecialty.
So as a medical director, I'm curious, what kind of depth of medical knowledge do you need? And did you ever find yourself not quite having the depth of knowledge? And how did you handle that? Did you just work closely with physician colleagues? And were you ever in a position as the medical director to make judgment calls on the medicine that the physician is practicing?
I am never the one that's making the question that says, you have to give this particular medication instead of that particular medication, or, this surgery wasn't indicated. That wasn't my role at all.
Okay.
And if ever things came up, that's where the relationships that you built were really valuable and would really come into play. Whenever something would come up, I would just start talking to all of my MD colleagues and say, what do you think about this? Do you think this is appropriate? Was there a better way to do this? Perhaps we could learn from this. And so, no, I'm not the one that's making all of those judgment calls, but I am the intermediary, figuring out how we can best do things and learn from those issues.
So again, that just reiterates that this is an administrative role. It's not that you're not overseeing physicians telling them how to practice medicine or claiming that you know more medicine than they do. It's just like you said, and I love the way you put it, it's a leadership role. It's who can look at an organization and figure out how to best move within it and make decisions that would help everybody. Have you seen or heard of other PAs becoming medical directors?
Yeah, so at the time that I became medical director, there was 2 other PAs that were also promoted across other specialties in the organization.
Okay.
It was a system-wide effort. And then at my new place, there is also a consideration of hiring an APP into a medical director role, which I think is great. And I like to see that trend.
What are some of the things that you think have been barriers to PAs getting into administrative roles? Like you said that there were some things that you had applied to previously that you didn't get. Do you think part of it was because you were a PA?
Yeah, I definitely think it was a barrier because I was a PA and that just wasn't the usual case of somebody who filled those positions. And I really think that we need to take a note from the playbook of nurses and physicians. They've both built a really strong brand around their profession, and they've both done significant research into the value of what their profession brings. And I think that although PAs have some of that, it's not as strong. And maybe that's because we haven't been in existence for as long, and we're certainly fewer in numbers in both of those professions. Most PAs that are going into admin roles are really creating their own path and creating that opportunity for themselves by showing their colleagues their value and that they can be leaders.
Yeah, I agree with you that particularly nurse practitioners and nurses in general have a long history of moving into supervisory and administrative roles. And I've seen a lot of advertisements for jobs, administrative jobs that say specifically nurse practitioner or DNP. If you're working somewhere and you see a posting and it doesn't say that it's open to PAs, I would assume that it's a good thing for PAs to question that, to ask the administration, why can't the PAs do this, or can I apply for this? Would you encourage people to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just an educational piece. Our profession doesn't have as strong of a presence as the nurses or the nurse practitioners, but we can also be valuable maybe where administration didn't realize that in the past.
If a PA is thinking about moving towards administration, what advice would you give people? How would you tell people to structure their careers or experiences to help them move into these positions?
I think the first step to take before you're in any formal leadership positions is to become a leader amongst your peers. You do not need to be in any formal leadership position to be seen as a leader. Asking to be on committees, providing value is probably the first area that you're going to get recognized by saying, hey, do you have a PA on this committee? I think that I can be helpful. Or saying, hey, I hear that you're doing such and such project. I have a little bit of insight. If there's any way that I can help, I would love to be involved. And you become the go-to person. And while it's wonderful that you kind of have a pulse on what's going on, you do continually get asked to be on committees and more committees and more committees as you become become involved. But that's how you meet people across the organization, and that's how you learn where the opportunities are and maybe understand places where PAs can fit in that maybe you hadn't considered before.
It's also a great way to help fix some of the things that we are frustrated with as clinicians. It's easy to say, oh, administration doesn't understand and they just do this or that. Well, if we get involved, which is kind of a hard pill to swallow in a way, it's like, well, I'm already overworked, I'm already stressed, and you're telling me I have to do more in order to make life better. But I do think as more APPs in general move into the administration side, the more representation we're going to have and the more ability we're going to have to change to some extent the culture that is in medicine.
At the end of the day, the people that are making the decisions about who they will hire, how much they will pay you, how much you work, are administrators. And so it's great to get an insight into how they're thinking and ultimately join them in helping make those decisions.
Anything else that you would like to share about your thoughts on moving into administration or just administration in general?
Yeah, I want to address kind of that topic of burnout or having to do more work. I think when you're really passionate about it, it has the opposite effect.
Oh,
And so when I got more involved, it inspired me. It lit a fire that I was super excited to be involved in these projects, and it turned the burnout upside down. And I think that's how you know that you're in the right spot, is that doing more work is providing more value to you and decreasing your burnout.
well, good stuff. Thank you so much for being a leader and bringing us to new heights in administration. And good luck in your current new role as a APP director.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here and kind of share the word to hopefully inspire many PAs and nurse practitioners around us.
Brooke has been a fantastic example of APPs getting involved in administration. If you're curious about other administrative roles and wondering what an APP director does, then watch the video here at the end. Thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time on Medicine Couch. Bye.